There is a moment, usually somewhere around the age of 60, when a man or woman sits alone in a quiet house and asks a question they spent 40 years too busy to ask, "What now?" The job that defined you is gone. The children who filled your evenings have their own children now. The calendar that once controlled your every hour is suddenly, terrifyingly empty. Most people fill that emptiness with television, worry, and slow decline. But a small number of people do something different. They grow younger, not in body, time is undefeated there, but in mind, in spirit, in the sharpness of their eyes when they speak. And the secret they discovered is not a supplement, not a diet, not a miracle. It is something the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago. How you spend your hands and your attention in the second half of life determines whether you decay or whether you flourish. Today, we uncover the 7 retirement hobbies that the ancient Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, would have approved of. Habits that do not just pass the time, but actively rebuild the mind, the body, and the soul after 60. Stay until the end, because the 7th hobby is the one almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most important one of all. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the home for timeless philosophy applied to modern life. If you are new here, this channel exists for one purpose: to take the hard-won wisdom of men like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus and translate it into something you can actually use in your relationships, your work, your solitude, and yes, in the years after retirement, when life asks you the most honest questions of all. If that sounds like something you need, consider subscribing, because we release new Stoic wisdom every single week designed to help you build an unshakable mind. Let's be honest about something most retirement articles won't tell you. Retirement is sold to us as a reward. 40, 50 years of labor, and finally rest. A permanent vacation. Golf in the morning, grandchildren in the afternoon, silence in the evening. And for the first few months, it does feel like a reward. But ask anyone who has actually lived through it, and they'll tell you something different happens around month 4 or 5. The golf gets boring. The grandchildren go home. The silence, which once sounded like peace, starts to sound like something else entirely. It starts to sound like absence. The Roman Stoics had a phrase for the danger hiding inside idle time. Otium sine literis mors est. Leisure without purpose is a kind of death. Seneca wrote those words to a friend nearly 2,000 years ago, warning him that rest without direction doesn't restore a person. It slowly erodes them. The mind, like an unused muscle, does not simply pause when you stop challenging it. It atrophies. This is why the statistics around retirement are so sobering. Multiple studies over the last 20 years have found a measurable increase in cognitive decline, depression, and even mortality. Risk in the years immediately following retirement, especially for people who retire from something without retiring to something. The body may have decades of life left in it, but without a reason to rise each morning, something in the mind quietly gives up. The Stoics would not have been surprised by this. They believed that human beings are not built for idleness. We are built for function. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor of Rome, wrote in his private journal, the book we now call Meditations, that a human being who is not doing the work proper to a human being is like an eye that has closed itself off from seeing, or a hand that has been cut from the body it belongs to. Purpose isn't a luxury for the Stoics. It's oxygen. So the question this video answers is not, how do I fill my time after 60? The question is much bigger and much more interesting. How do I choose activities that don't just fill time, but actively cultivate wisdom, virtue, and vitality in the years that matter most? Because here's the truth almost nobody says out loud. The 7, 8, 9 hours a day you now have that you didn't have before, that is not empty space to be feared. That is the largest gift of freedom you have been given since childhood. The Stoics would tell you that how you fill it is not a small decision. It is in many ways the final test of the character you spent a lifetime building. So let's walk through the 7 hobbies. rooted in ancient Stoic wisdom, backed by what we now understand about aging, the brain, and the human need for purpose that don't just keep you busy after 60, they keep you young. And I want you to do something as we go through this list. In the comments below, tell me which one of these 7 you already do, and which one surprises you. I read every comment, and some of the most powerful stories on this channel come from people exactly like you, sharing exactly how they rebuilt their life after loss, after retirement, after the world told them their most useful years were behind them. They were wrong. Let's begin. Hobby number 1, the discipline of walking with attention. The first hobby is the simplest, and for that reason the most underestimated. Walking, not walking as exercise, though the physical benefit is real and well documented. Improved cardiovascular health, better balance, reduced fall risk, stronger bones. Every physician on earth will tell you to walk. But the Stoics understood something deeper about walking that modern fitness culture has almost entirely forgotten. Walking, done correctly, is a practice of attention. Marcus Aurelius ruled the largest empire on earth, and yet some of the most important lines in Meditations were almost certainly composed in his mind while walking the frontier, camps of the Danube, observing the natural world around him, the shape of clouds, the behavior of animals, the turning of the seasons. He wrote that nature does nothing without purpose, and that a mind trained to notice the world becomes a mind that is harder to disturb, harder to frighten, harder to bore. Here is the exercise, and I want you to actually try this, not just hear about it. The next time you walk, whether it's around your block, through a park or along a trail, leave your phone in your pocket. Don't listen to a podcast. Don't listen to music. Walk in silence and give yourself one simple task. Name in your mind 5 things you notice that you have never noticed before. The color of a particular leaf, the sound a certain bird makes, the way the light hits a fence at that hour of the morning. This sounds almost too simple to matter, but this is precisely the kind of practice the Stoics called prosoche, sustained attention, and it is one of the most powerful tools we have for keeping an aging mind sharp. Neuroscience backs this up in ways the Stoics could never have proven but clearly intuited. Novel sensory input, new sights, new sounds, new textures of experience stimulates neurogenesis, the growth of new neural pathways, particularly in the hippocampus, the part of the brain most associated with memory. A walk on the same treadmill, staring at the same wall, does very little for this. A walk where the mind is actively searching, actively noticing, actively alive to its surroundings, does a great deal. There's a story I think about often about a retired school teacher, we'll call her Eleanor, because her real story was shared with me by a viewer of this very channel who retired at 62 after 38 years teaching elementary school. Within a year, she told her daughter she felt like she was disappearing. Her memory felt foggier. Her mood was flat. Her daughter, worried, encouraged her to start walking every morning and gave her one rule: no phone, no music, just walking and looking. Eleanor resisted at first. It felt pointless, almost silly. But she kept at it because her daughter asked her to. 3 months later, she told her daughter something remarkable. She said the walk had become the best part of her day, not because of the exercise, but because she had started noticing things again, the specific way frost formed on a particular hedge, the return of a robin's nest each spring. She said it was the first time since retiring that she felt curious about anything. That is the Stoic secret hiding inside something as ordinary as walking. It is not about the steps. It is about training the mind to stay awake to the world instead of sleepwalking through the remaining decades of a life. If this idea resonates with you, the idea that small, deliberate daily practices can rebuild a mind that felt like it was fading, do me a favor and hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear exactly this. Now let's move to the second hobby, and this one was arguably Seneca's favorite discipline of all: Hobby number 2, reading as the conversation with the dead. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius in what we now call Letters from a Stoic, gave some of the most practical advice on reading ever written, advice that is almost never followed, even by people who consider themselves avid readers. He said something that sounds strange at first. Don't read many books. Read a few books, deeply, repeatedly, until they become part of you. He compared shallow, scattered reading to a traveler who visits many countries but has no home anywhere. Such a person, he said, has many acquaintances but no friends. The same is true of books. A person who skims 50 books a year retains almost nothing. A person who reads 5 books a year, slowly, taking notes, arguing with the author in the margins, rereading passages that strike them, that person is transformed by what they read. This matters enormously after 60, and here is why. One of the most well-established findings in cognitive aging research is that reading, genuine, focused, sustained reading, not scrolling, is one of the strongest predictors of preserved cognitive function into old age. The Rush Memory and Aging Project, a long-running study following thousands of older adults, found that people who engaged in frequent mentally stimulating activities like reading had a significantly slower rate of cognitive decline than those who did not. Independent of physical health, reading forces the brain to hold complex ideas, follow long arcs of reasoning, and build vocabulary and memory simultaneously. A full-body workout for a muscle most. People stop training the moment they leave school. But the Stoic angle on reading goes beyond brain health. Seneca called reading philosophy a conversation with the dead, and he meant this as something profoundly comforting, not morbid. When you read Marcus Aurelius, you are, in a very real sense, sitting across from a man who ruled Rome nearly 2,000 years ago, and he is telling you, in complete honesty, about his fears, his failures, his private attempts to be a better man. Nobody in his own lifetime read those words. He wrote them only for himself, and yet here you are, receiving his most private thoughts as a gift across 2 millennia. For someone who is retired, who may have lost a spouse, who may feel that their circle of friends is shrinking as the years pass, and this is a real and painful fact of aging, that our social circles do tend to contract, reading philosophy offers something extraordinary, an unbroken chain of company that never dies, never moves away, and is never too busy to talk to you. Seneca is always there. Epictetus is always there. Marcus Aurelius is always there. You can open the book at 2 in the morning if sleep won't come, and he will speak to you exactly as he spoke to himself. I want to be specific here, because vague advice like read more is useless. If you are starting after 60, do not begin with an enormous scholarly translation. Begin with a modern, accessible translation of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It was written in short, journal-like entries and was never meant to be a formal treatise, so it reads more like the honest diary of a struggling, thoughtful man than an academic text. Read 1 entry per day. Just 1. Sit with it. Ask yourself quite literally, does this apply to my life right now? Keep a small notebook next to the book, and when a line strikes you, copy it out by hand. There is something about the physical act of handwriting a sentence that cements it into memory far more effectively than simply reading it passively. And here's a question I genuinely love to know the answer to. Put it in the comments. What is the one book, philosophical or otherwise, that you return to again and again? I want to build a list from this community because some of the best recommendations I've ever received came from people exactly like you, in the comments of this channel. Now, from the life of the mind, let's move our hands into the soil, because the third hobby was one that both Cicero and the Stoics considered essential to a well-ordered old age. Hobby number 3, gardening and the practice of amor fati. There is a reason nearly every culture on earth associates old age with gardens. Something about tending a small patch of earth seems to match. Something deep in the aging human spirit. The Stoics had a concept called amor fati, the love of fate. It does not mean passive resignation to whatever happens. It means an active, deliberate embrace of reality exactly as it is, including its limitations, its seasons, its endings, and there is no better teacher of amor fati on earth than a garden. A garden does not care about your schedule, your ambition, or your impatience. It operates on its own time. You cannot rush a tomato. You cannot bully a rose into blooming early through sheer willpower. A garden teaches you gently but relentlessly that some things are within your control: the quality of the soil, the regularity of the watering, the placement in sun or shade, and some things are not: the weather, the pests, the unpredictable behavior of nature itself. This is almost exactly Epictetus's foundational teaching, the very first line of his Enchiridion. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. The path to peace lies in knowing the difference and directing your energy only toward what is actually yours to control. A retired person who takes up gardening is, whether they realize it or not, enrolling themselves in a daily masterclass on the dichotomy of control. You do the work that is yours to do: plant, water, weed, protect, and then you release your grip on the outcome. Some seasons the harvest is abundant. Some seasons a late frost destroys everything you planted. The Stoic gardener does not rage against the frost. The Stoic gardener says, as Marcus Aurelius might have said, "This too is the nature of things," and plants again next season. There is also, and this should not be understated, a profound physical benefit. Gardening is a low-impact, full-body activity: the bending, the digging, the carrying of water that maintains flexibility, grip strength, and cardiovascular health in ways that are gentle, enough for aging joints but demanding enough to matter. Studies on horticultural therapy have shown measurable reductions in cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, after even short sessions of gardening, and exposure to soil itself has been linked in some research to increased serotonin activity. There is a bacterium commonly found in healthy soil, Mycobacterium vaccae, that some studies suggest may have mood-elevating properties when encountered through skin contact or inhalation while gardening. But beyond the biology, there is the simple, undeniable emotional truth that a garden gives an aging person something rare: a reason to go outside every single day, rain or shine, because something out there depends on them. Purpose in its most literal physical form. A living thing that needs you. I think of a man, a retired accountant, in his own words, a man who measured his entire adult life in tax deadlines, who took up gardening reluctantly, at his wife's insistence in the first year of his retirement. He told me in a comment on a previous video that he expected to hate it. Instead, he said something that stuck with me. For 40 years, my job was to make numbers balance. Now my job is to watch something grow that I can't control at all, and somehow that's more peaceful than anything I did in my career. That, right there, is amor fati in its purest, most practical form. If you're the kind of person who's already sitting there, thinking of your own garden, your own small plot of soil, that's taught you more about patience than any book ever could, tell me about it in the comments. I promise you, someone reading this will be inspired to start their first garden this very season because of what you share. Now let's talk about a hobby that Epictetus himself would have insisted on, because it is, quite literally, the practice he built his entire philosophy around: writing. Hobby number 4, the Stoic journal and the examination of the self. Here is a fact that surprises most people the first time they hear it. Meditations, the most famous work of Stoic philosophy in existence, was never meant to be published. It was Marcus Aurelius's personal journal. He was not writing to inspire future generations. He was writing to himself as a discipline, likely every single evening, to hold himself accountable to the philosophy he claimed to believe in. This practice, reviewing your day, your reactions, your failures and successes in maintaining virtue, was not unique to Marcus Aurelius. Seneca describes it explicitly in his essay on anger, crediting the practice to an earlier philosopher named Sextius. Every night before sleep, Sextius would ask himself, "What bad habit have I cured today? What fault have I resisted? In what way am I better?" Seneca adopted the exact same ritual himself, saying that he could not sleep until he had conducted this private tribunal on his own day. This is journaling, but it is journaling with a very specific and powerful structure. Not a diary of events, but an examination of character. And for a retired person, this practice solves a problem that almost nobody talks about honestly: the loss of external accountability. When you worked, you had performance reviews. You had a boss, a schedule, deadlines, colleagues who noticed if you slipped. Retirement removes almost all external structure, and for many people this creates a quiet, creeping laziness, not out of weakness, but simply because the scaffolding that used to hold discipline in place is gone. Stoic journaling rebuilds that scaffolding, except now, you are your own boss, your own reviewer, your own source of accountability. Here is a simple structure you can start tonight. And I genuinely encourage you to try this rather than just filing it away as an interesting idea. Get a plain notebook, nothing fancy. The Stoics were suspicious of excessive luxury even in their tools of virtue. Each night, write 3 short answers. First, what did I do well today? Not accomplishments in the world's terms, but moments where I responded with patience, courage, or self-control when it would have been easier not to. Second, where did I fail? Where did I let anger, laziness, or self-pity win? Write this honestly, but without self-punishment. The Stoics were strict with themselves, but never cruel. Marcus Aurelius reminds himself constantly that anger at his own failures is itself a failure of Stoic principle. Third, what will I do differently tomorrow? One specific, concrete intention, not a vague resolution. This takes perhaps 10 minutes. But over months and years, it does something remarkable. It turns the vast, undifferentiated openness of retirement, all those empty hours, into a structured practice of self-improvement. You are no longer simply waiting out your remaining years. You are actively, deliberately, becoming a better version of yourself, one evening at a time, and you have a written record to prove it. There's an additional benefit here that's rarely discussed. The act of handwriting itself, done regularly, is a fine motor skill that keeps the connections between brain and hand active, a small but real defense against the kind of cognitive and motor decline that comes from disuse. But the deeper gift is psychological. A person who journals in this Stoic mode after 60 tends to report something researchers call generativity, the sense that one's life is still contributing, still growing, still oriented towards something beyond mere survival. Erik Erikson, the psychologist who studied stages of adult development, identified generativity versus stagnation as the central psychological struggle of later adulthood. The Stoic journal is, in effect, a nightly weapon against stagnation. I'll ask you directly, have you ever kept a journal, even briefly? If you have, or if tonight is the night you start, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. And if this video is giving you real, usable tools rather than just vague inspiration, this is exactly the moment to subscribe, because we build entire practical frameworks like this one every week on this channel. Now let's turn from the inner world of the journal to something entirely different, working with the hands and the deep Stoic respect for craftsmanship. Hobby number 5. Craftsmanship and the discipline of mastery. Epictetus, one of the 3 great Stoic voices we return to again and again on this channel, was born a slave. Before he became a philosopher, before he taught some of the most influential students of his era, he lived among craftsmen, tradesmen, and laborers. Some historians believe his early exposure to skilled trade work shaped the way he taught philosophy itself, using the metaphor of the craftsman constantly. He compares living virtuously to being a skilled carpenter or sculptor, someone who has trained their hands and their judgment together over years until excellence becomes second nature. Woodworking, pottery, metalworking, model building, instrument repair, leatherwork, It does not matter which specific craft you choose. What matters is the underlying structure of the activity, because craftsmanship offers something almost no other retirement activity offers in the same concentrated form: immediate, tangible, honest feedback. When you work with wood, the wood does not lie to you. If your joint is imprecise, it will not fit. If your measurement is wrong, the piece will not stand straight. There is no ambiguity, no politics, no vague social feedback to interpret. You either did it correctly or you did not, and the material will tell you the truth every single time. This is, psychologically, an enormous relief for people who spend decades in careers full of office politics, unclear feedback, and the exhausting management of other people's opinions of them. A craft gives you a relationship with reality that is completely honest. This matters for the aging brain in a very specific, well-documented way. Fine motor skill development, the kind required in carving, sanding, shaping, joining, activates and strengthens neural pathways associated with the motor cortex and cerebellum, areas that are particularly vulnerable to age-related decline. Occupational therapists frequently recommend craft-based activities, specifically for older adults, because they combine physical dexterity, spatial reasoning, planning, and patience all within a single activity. But the Stoic dimension goes deeper still. Seneca wrote about the value of a steady hand and a steady mind, the idea that the discipline required to master any craft mirrors the discipline required to master oneself. You cannot rush the sanding of a table without ruining the finish. You cannot force a piece of clay into shape through impatience without collapsing the form. Craftsmanship demands patience, and in demanding it repeatedly, it trains it. The same way lifting a weight repeatedly trains a muscle. There's a particular story that captures this beautifully. A retired factory foreman who, after 40 years of overseeing an assembly line, he never actually built anything on himself, took up woodworking at 65 almost as a joke, building a birdhouse from a kit his grandson gave him for his birthday. He told me that the birdhouse came out crooked, ugly, barely functional, and that he was, in his own words, furious with a piece of wood for the first time in my life. But instead of quitting, he built another one, and another. 3 years later, he was building furniture, actual, functional, beautiful furniture for his entire extended family. He said the proudest moment of his retirement, prouder even than certain achievements from his working career, was the day his daughter asked him to build her a dining table, because she trusted his hands more than any store-bought option. That is mastery, built slowly, honestly, through repeated failure and repeated correction. Precisely the Stoic model of becoming virtuous. You do not become wise or patient or disciplined all at once. You become it the way you become a craftsman, one imperfect attempt at a time, refined through humility and repetition. If you've ever picked up a craft later in life, whether it turned out beautifully or, like that first birdhouse, came out a little crooked, I want to hear about it. Share it in the comments, because these stories are exactly what this community is built on. We've covered the body in motion, the mind in reading, the hands in soil, the self in reflection, and the hands again in craft. Now, hobby number 6 turns outward, towards something the Stoics considered one of the highest duties of a well-lived life: teaching what you know to someone else. Hobby number 6, mentorship and the Stoic duty to others. The Stoics did not believe in a philosophy of pure self-improvement, isolated from the world. This is one of the most commonly misunderstood aspects of Stoicism in modern culture. People often imagine it as a kind of emotional armor, a way to withdraw and become untouchable. But the actual Stoics believed the opposite. They believed human beings are, in Marcus Aurelius's words, made for cooperation. The way the upper and lower rows of teeth are made to work together. A life lived only for yourself, cut off from contributing to others, was for the Stoics a life only half-lived. This is why mentorship belongs on this list, and why it may be the single most underrated retirement activity that exists. After 60, most people have accumulated decades of hard-won, specific knowledge, knowledge about a trade, a craft, a way of navigating hardship, a way of raising children, a way of running a business, a way of surviving loss. And in most modern societies, that knowledge simply evaporates, unused, because there is no formal mechanism connecting the people who have it to the people who need it. Mentorship, whether it's formal, through organizations that pair retirees with young people in their former field, or informal, simply through spending time with grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or neighborhood kids, and actually teaching them something real, not just supervising them, restores the sense of generativity we discussed earlier in a way that almost nothing else can match. You are not just occupying time, you are transmitting something. You are making yourself, quite literally, useful to the continuation of the world after you. There is also a selfish benefit here if we're honest, and the Stoics would not be embarrassed to name it. Teaching is one of the most effective ways to sharpen your own understanding. Seneca wrote to Lucilius that in teaching others, we teach ourselves twice over. The act of explaining an idea clearly forces you to understand it more clearly than you did before. A retired engineer who mentors a young apprentice does not just help the apprentice. He re-examines his own decades of knowledge, organizes it, tests it against new questions, and in the process, keeps his own mind active in a way that passive retirement never could. Consider what we now understand about cognitive reserve, the brain's capacity to withstand age-related changes by having built dense, flexible neural networks over a lifetime of complex activity. Teaching is one of the most cognitively complex activities a human being can perform. It requires you to model another person's mind, anticipate their confusion, restructure your explanation on the fly, and respond with patience to repeated questions. This is an extraordinarily rich cognitive workout, arguably richer than nearly anything else on this list. I think of a woman, a retired nurse of nearly 4 decades, who began volunteering at a local community clinic, not to work shifts herself, but to mentor newly graduated nurses navigating their first difficult months. She told me that in her working years, she never had time to slow down and explain why she made certain clinical judgments. She simply made them under pressure and moved to the next patient. In retirement, mentoring gave her the chance to finally articulate the wisdom she had accumulated, but never had time to put into words. She said, and I remember this clearly, I spent 40 years being useful with my hands. Now I get to be useful with my mind, and somehow that feels like the better half of the job. This is Marcus Aurelius's cooperative view of human nature made real. We are not isolated units seeking our own comfort. We are, as he wrote, parts of one body, existing to work together for the whole. A retirement spent solely in private leisure denies you this, the specific, deep satisfaction of being needed. If there's someone in your life you could be mentoring right now, a grandchild, a young colleague from your old field, a neighbor just starting out, I'd challenge you, right now, pause this video and think of their name. And then tell me in the comments who they are, even just their first name or their relationship to you. Naming it is often the first step toward actually doing it. Now we arrive at the 7th hobby, the one I promised you at the very beginning of this video, and I want to be honest with you. This one is less commonly discussed than the other 6, but I believe after everything the Stoics taught about mortality, it may be the most important of all. Hobby number 7, facing mortality through physical discipline. The Stoics had a practice called memento mori, remember that you will die. This sounds to modern ears morbid, even depressing, but the Stoics used it as precisely the opposite, a tool for urgency, for gratitude, for living each day as though it actually mattered, because it does, and because there are, in fact, a finite number of them left. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself constantly about the shortness of life, reminding himself that he could leave this life at any moment, and that this fact should shape how he acted, not with despair, but with clarity and purpose. He famously wrote that you could depart from life right now, and let that determine what you do, say, and think. After 60, mortality is no longer an abstract philosophical concept. It is a present physical reality. Friends begin to pass away. Health becomes a daily conversation rather than an assumption, and the body itself sends unmistakable signals that time is, in fact, finite. Most people respond to this awareness with avoidance. They simply try not to think about it, filling their days with distraction to keep the fear at bay. The seventh hobby I want to recommend is a physical discipline. And I want to be specific rather than vague, because vague advice like stay active is not useful. I am recommending a structured, regular physical practice that directly confronts the body's limitations rather than ignoring them. Something like swimming, Tai Chi, or a supervised strength training program appropriate to your specific health situation, done consistently several times a week for the rest of your life. Here is why this specific category of hobby belongs at the top of this list, and why it is different from simply exercising. Swimming and Tai Chi, in particular, are activities that force you into direct, honest contact with your body's current capabilities. Not the capabilities you had at 30, not the capabilities you wish you had, but the actual, present capabilities of the body you have today. Water does not care what you used to be able to do. Tai Chi's slow, deliberate balance work does not care either. Both disciplines demand that you meet your body exactly where it is, with humility, and work from there. This is memento mori made physical. Each session is a quiet acknowledgement. My body is aging. My time is limited, and rather than deny this fact or hide from it, I choose to engage with it directly, with discipline, with respect. The research on this is remarkably consistent. Regular aerobic and balance-based exercise in adults over 60 is associated with measurably slower rates of both physical and cognitive decline, reduced fall risk, better cardiovascular outcomes, and this part matters enormously, significantly lower rates of depression and anxiety. The physical act of disciplined movement appears to directly combat the psychological distress that often accompanies the awareness of aging, but the Stoic reason to choose this hobby goes beyond the measurable health data. Seneca wrote that it is not that we have a short life, but that we waste much of it, that life is long enough if you know how to use it. A structured physical practice, done with the awareness that each session is a gift you are choosing to use well rather than waste, transforms exercise from a chore into something closer to a spiritual discipline. You are not simply trying to live longer in some abstract, fear-driven way. You are practicing living well, right now, in the body you actually have, today. I think about an 81-year-old man I read about who began swimming at 63, shortly after a heart scare that, in his words, made death feel like something in the room with me, not just a word in a book. He did not swim to reverse aging. He understood clearly that reversing time is not possible. He swam because it was the 1 hour of his day when he felt entirely present, entirely alive, entirely engaged with the reality of his own body rather than avoiding it. Nearly 20 years later, he still swims most mornings. He said something in an interview that I think about often. "I'm not swimming away from death. I'm swimming toward being alive while I still am." That is the Stoic use of memento mori, not fear, but urgency, not despair, but clarity. The seventh hobby is not really about swimming, or Tai Chi, or strength training specifically. It is about choosing a physical discipline that keeps you in honest contact with your own mortality, and using that contact not to freeze in fear, but to move every single day with purpose. If you notice, every single hobby on this list shares something in common, and I want to make it explicit before we close, because this is the actual heart of the video. None of these 7 hobbies are about escaping old age. None of them promise to make you young again in the way the world usually means it. Unwrinkled, unslowed, unchanged. The Stoics never promised that, and neither will I. What they promised, and what these 7 hobbies actually deliver, is something better and more honest. A way of inhabiting the years you have left. however many they are, with attention, discipline, purpose, and connection, instead of avoidance, drift, and fear. Walking teaches attention. Reading teaches companionship across time. Gardening teaches acceptance of what you cannot control. Journaling teaches honest self-examination. Craftsmanship teaches patient mastery. Mentorship teaches purposeful contribution. And physical discipline teaches honest confrontation with mortality itself. Together they form something the Stoics would have recognized instantly. A complete philosophy of aging, built not around denial, but around virtue, the same four virtues Marcus Aurelius returned to again and again in his private journal: wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. Each hobby on this list is, in its own way, a daily practice of one or more of those virtues.